Welcome YouTubers, this is NecroarcanistXIII in association with Bandit 1569, and he has been kind enough to work on this project with me. I shall be narrating a story that I've wrote myself titled The Crusade Chronicles, which is a dark fantasy genre series taking place several decades into the future. Bandit 1569 shall be uploading each chapter to his channel as I narrate each one, so if you enjoy this series then please subscribe. I should make a good point by saying that my work is intended for mature audiences, as it will deal with some graphic themes as events take place, so if you're under the age of 16 or are sensitive to themes of violence, horror, gore and or coarse language, then I would not recommend this. But even though this starts out tame, things can escalate rather quickly, and so I will place warnings at the beginning of each chapter. Also for the viewers, I will include hand-drawn artwork depicting certain characters and scenes, and I will occasionally insert music should there be a plot relevance. Also at the end of each chapter, I will dedicate a section towards the inspirations that went into the designs of characters, scenes, and other symbolism that occurs. So all the kinds of people that will sit down and wonder why did he say this or why does she dress like that, I will let you in, but not all at once, about the creativity and inspiration that went into each chapter. So on a final note, a lot of the main characters are in fact real people who are good friends of mine who asked me kindly to put them in there, including Bandit 1569 himself. So I'm going to change some names for personal reasons. So sit back and enjoy the Crusade Chronicles, Book 1, titled Hell's Crusade. The sun rose out of the morning sky over Tasmania. The townsfolk of Queenstown were becoming active, and as they went through their routine lives, nobody noticed as a faint black mist travelled through the streets and around their feet, spying on them with evil intent. The mist trailed around town until full daybreak, at which point it seeped down to a crack in the pavement just outside of Mountain Heights School. Several of the senior students were talking by the front gate, and among them was a tall, moderately overweight student with thick, messy black hair, a slightly shorter boy who was a lot thinner, had moderate acne and thin curly blonde hair, and then a tall man with light brown skin, a curly brown afro, and the name Bob tattooed on his hand in permanent marker. "I can't wait, Bazza," said the first boy. "I just got my motorbike license. I think I'm coming to leave it dressed as a bikie." "You do realise you're going to have to wear a suit, John," replied the second boy. "Don't you realise it's fancy dress, Bailey?" replied the brown-skinned boy. "JJ and I come as Mr. T and Lady Gaga." John pulled a smirk. "I don't see you pulling off Lady Gaga though, Bob." A student with black hair, shorter than John's, but in a similar style, and acne worse than Bailey's, came running past, trying to catch a football. However, he ran into a large pole and was immediately knocked unconscious, causing a large dent in the pole. John walked over to the football, picked it up, and threw it straight into the boy's head. "Get up, Ethan, you wuss," he said. Ethan jumped up, and as the two boys walked over to Bailey and Bob, they were joined by a student similar in height to John, who had a much larger curly afro than Bob's, and he also had lightly tanned skin. "What's up then?" he asked. "Not much, Brian," replied John. "Did you hear? I just saw it on the news. There's a meteor headed right for Australia." "Jesus Christ," said Ethan, "we're all gonna die." Ethan shouted in fear as he ran blindly in the same pole as before, somehow fixing the dent in the process. Yet another student, the tallest by far, who had severe acne and a blonde mullet, appeared from out of nowhere. His sudden appearance scared John. "Jesus Christ, Stan," he said, "you scared the shit out of me." "I heard you guys talking about the meteor," replied Stan. "I wonder what that big fireball in the sky was." Everybody looked up, and sure enough, there was a large fireball that passed through the sky and crash-landed into the deep forest surrounding one side of the school. Bailey turned around and headed off in the other direction. "Where the hell are you going?" asked John. "I'm returning my suit," said Bailey. "You chicken, don't you want to see the meteorite?" "I'm not a chicken." John started to make chicken noises to the tune of Chicken Dance, only to realise that everybody else had left without him. He ran away, still singing chicken noises, and eventually caught up to his friends. However, he was running too fast to stop running, and he crashed into a tree. He began rolling down a steep hill, and when he finally came to his senses and looked around to gain his bearings, he realized that he was in a meteorite impact crater. Looking at the object in the middle, an obsidian altar supported the fallen meteorite, and the ground had a variety of mystic runes carved into it. John walked up to the meteorite and touched it, and it immediately crumbled into dust, revealing a spherical object that glowed with every colour known to man. However, as he went to touch this orb, John was alerted to the presence of 3 men completely covered by hemp robes. The tallest man, who was 2 feet taller than the 6-foot John, spoke to him with a voice that was rough and almost sounded like a snake speaking in English. "What's this?" he said. "A thieving boy! Be gone!" The man tried to grab John, but John saw the knife in his hand and decided to grab the shiny orb and run away. As he jumped out of the way with ninja reflexes, his body started to glow with a pulsating rainbow light. "No!" shouted the man. "Stop him!" However, in a massive flash, John grew dragon-like wings. His body was clad in black leather armor, cape and jeans. His boots resembled those of a grunge/goth style, and a crystal orb appeared on his chest, strapped on with brown leather. Black leather gloves appeared on his hands, and the backs of the gloves had parts cut out to resemble an eye, with holes making the whites and the pupils while keeping a circle of leather in the middle for the iris. On his face appeared a mask that resembled what would be the front of a vampire's skull, and the mask covered everything but his bearded lower jaw. His hair was refashioned to resemble a large mullet, but the front half of his hair protruded upwards like a row of 9 devil horns. And the back and sides of his head were completely covered by shoulder-length hair. Around his neck was an iron chain from which hung a plain silver ring, and in his left hand appeared a wicked scythe of elder wood, which, as the shaft grew, became clad in the bone of a spinal cord, which had the skull attached. The scythe blade stuck out of the skull's gaping mouth, while a smaller serrated blade emerged from the back of the skull. The eye socket area supported metal claws that held another opal orb, and along the main blade of the scythe was inscribed the word Armageddon. Purple fire and black lightning danced around John's body like a ghostly aura as his eyes burned and sparked with hatred. "He is reborn!" howled the 3 cultists in despair. "We have failed our master!" As John recovered from the shock of his transformation, he began to examine his new attire. "What the hell is this?" he said. "You are the vessel of the Elder God," said the tallest cultist. "Our mission was to prevent his rebirth, allowing us to usher in total and eternal chaos. However, your death is going to have to suffice." "Can we talk about this?" asked John. However, the 3 men suddenly lunged for him, and John reacted by blocking their knives with his scythe shaft. Then he counterattacked and cleaved all 3 in half with one mighty blow. The 3 cultists lay there dying, and the shortest one was still capable of speech. "Fulfillment of our mission would have saved your pitiful race," he said sadly. "But I'm afraid you and your kind have little left to live." The 3 inhumans collapsed dead, and as John's friends came into view, all of them were stunned by what they saw. "Holy shit, dude," said Bob. John started to examine himself more closely until he suddenly burst into dark flame and returned to his normal clothes. "We have to swear to keep this a secret, you guys," he said. "God knows what's going to happen if word spreads out, okay? Don't want bloody governments coming down here testing on me or some shit like that." The boys began to agree with John, but then they could hear the school bell ringing and started running to class. Nearby, the black mist from before was watching them. It dived through a crack in the dirt and began pushing its way through the underground until it reached into an ungodly realm. Mid-flight, the mist took the form of a large bird and dived across lakes of flaming blood, dashing through caves that echoed with the screams of tortured sinners. Many monstrous creatures held gruesome instruments of torture as they inflicted horrendous acts of mutilation upon their victims, and as they died, their torturers used supernatural forces to bring them back to life, just so they could butcher them all over again in a never-ending cycle. The bird eventually landed on a rocky crag and took humanoid form. The mist transformed into a black robe, and a skeletal figure emerged from within, giving the impression of a grim reaper. The figure bowed and then kneeled before a shadow looming in the distance. Between the two lay an altar of brimstone which had a clear spherical crystal atop it. Within the horrendous shadow seemed to float a dark entity that gestured with its hands as it spoke in a forgotten tongue. They failed you, Master, replied the Reaper. The shadowy entity did not seem fazed and spoke again. Master, as the right hand of Lucifer, I must inform the princes about this. The shadows went away to reveal none other than the devil himself sitting upon his throne. Satan then began to speak in English.
Worry not, Mephistopheles. The Shadow Council already knows. Pride and envy already sow their seeds in ashen sand. Greed and gluttony go hand in hand. Lust still plans her plot, sloth yet cares not. Wrath shall not play the largest part, but the smallest to start.
But the emissary of the gods walks the earth, replied Mephistopheles. He will find a way to stop us.
Is that so?
Replied Satan.
I see the emissary in the Ocularis Infernum. He is but a child, afraid of his new power. I doubt he will put it to much use for fear of detection, if not by our spies, but by the butchers of the world of science, who probe every little crevice until they find what will devour them all. It shall be the invention of atomic weaponry for a twofold, should they find him.
Perhaps you're right, replied the Lich. I just have a concern that, given enough time, the Elder God will march upon Pandemonium and the Nine Circles. Satan raised an obsidian pitchfork into the air, and it transformed into a sword with 3 blades that was covered in ethereal hellfire.
If he tries any heroics,
bellowed the devil,
he shall feel wrath in its full form. Slaying the Elder God is the true glory, but to take his soul captive and throw it into the abyss is just a perk.
Mephistopheles laughed loudly, and the sound was painful, like a banshee's wail. Destroying him now will be a waste, you say, he said. You deserve the satisfaction of a challenge, Master, so what you require is a brilliant scheme to pass the time. Time in the mortal realm will pass swiftly compared to here, so we need to act before the Elder reaches his full potential. Okay, so that was the prologue of Hell's Crusade. And already you can see that there is a drastic plot change in which the devil himself has become involved and is talking about an elder god of sorts. So let's see how the event shall play out in the main story, which takes place as chapter 1 is titled 30 Years Later. In the year 2044, the world had fallen into chaos. World Wars 3 and 4 have ended recently, leaving the human race on the brink of self-destruction. The once proud nation of Australia was taken over by a malicious dictatorship empire, led by a despot whose name was forbidden to mention even in impolite conversation. Under strict and unnecessary laws, heavily armoured faceless soldiers roam the streets, searching for the smallest of contradictions with which to shoot first and never ask questions later. Now adult John, perched on the roof of his own house in his demonic garb, sighing as he stared into the evening night. His sad old jaded eyes held the moon's glare in their glaze as he sat on a rusted red tin roof. As he looked down, he saw an oversized dog which was similar in appearance to a feral wolf, only with a blue tint to his fur. With a hole in his right ear and a scar closed over his right eye, chased down and devoured a small tabby cat before he went back to staring at the night sky. On the horizon appeared a tall, thin teenager with long silver hair that nearly touched the ground as it flowed over a grey trench coat, which was worn without the arms and the sleeves. The only thing that prevented the trench coat from falling off of his body was a thick chain that was attached to the collar. And within the coat was a t-shirt which had a reversed E on the upper right. The boy also wore black tracksuit pants and laceless running shoes. His face was somewhat feminine in nature, and he had bright red-coloured eyes. Hidden within his long hair was a samurai sword which was the same length. The tip of the blade curved back on itself like an arrowhead. As the figure stealthily walked up to the front door of the yellow-painted house, John quickly grabbed onto the gutter pipe and swung down behind him in extreme silence. When he tapped on the boy's shoulder, he jumped around in shock. "Jesus Christ," he said, "don't do that." "Where the bloody hell were you, Dante? I called you a half hour ago to say tea's ready." "I got caught by the soldiers thanks to the curfew law," replied the boy. "I had to ditch him. I never took you for a running man," replied John. "Not that, bitch. I mean, I kicked him into the Queen River when they tried to handcuff me." "That's my boy." Suddenly, the front door was opened by a 5-foot teenager who had stark white hair with long emo dreads covering his left eye. The exposed right eye was red, just like the other boys, and his skin was pale, with the veins barely visible through the skin. A purple scarf covered his mouth and lower nose, as was draped over his short bomber jacket and leather jeans. His grunge boots leaned against the doorway while he stretched leather gloves over his hands. "Vincent's about to go for seconds, Dante," he said. "You had better finish your excuses quickly." John looked past Dante and pointed at the boy in the door. "Butt out, Raziel. We're nearly done here." Dante rushed past his brother as John tried to grab him by the collar. "Vincent," shouted Dante, "don't you dare touch my bloody chicken." Raziel casually wandered inside, leaving John to bury his face into the palm of his hand and shake his head disappointedly. John wandered inside and left the door open just a crack, and as he wandered down the empty corridor and into the lounge room, the blue dog from earlier skulked inside and kicked the door shut with his rear legs. John himself wandered down an empty corridor into the lounge room, where he leapt over the back of the couch and lay down watching the TV. The dog waltzed into the room and lay down behind the couch himself. "Did you enjoy bringing the feline holocaust, Saberfang?" The dog grunted, and John took that as a response. Sounds of a fight were on the edge of earshot, and it seemed to be coming from the nearby kitchen. "Vincent, I swear to God," shouted Dante's voice, "let me go, you fat bastard." Suddenly, Dante was thrown into the room, where he crashed into the wall over the couch before he fell down behind it. A massive muscular figure in torn flannel shirt, Megadeth t-shirt, stonewashed denim jeans and heavy work boots limboed under the doorway. His size and stature cast a mountain-like shadow across the rest of the room. He shook his head, waving around a mass of thick black hair which drooped over his head like stalagmites. Then he shouted, with his booming voice rattling a half-full glass of whiskey which was sitting on a nearby bench. "Mine now." Vincent grunted as he tossed a large chicken leg into the air and swallowed it whole. John paid no attention to the boys as he noticed on the TV that a gang leader was being interviewed by the news. "Yeah, I killed him," said the gang leader. "Killed him with my bare hands. I'm the best fighter on the West Coast. Any asshole dare say differently, I'll waste him. Anytime, anywhere. 64719474. John immediately pulled a small mobile phone out of his pocket and started pushing buttons. From out of nowhere, a large circular object with 4 square-edged blades whizzed through the air and struck Dante. The force was enough to pin him to the wall beside him, and then a young girl who had long black hair and purple eyes, wearing a black singlet, a purple dress that reached her knees in the front but reached her ankles in the back, and a diamond bracelet around her right ankle stepped into the light. On her left wrist was a massive jewel bracelet, and her black high-heeled shoes reflected a glittery light.
"Will you two be quiet?"
she yelled.
"I'm trying to get some sleep."
Vincent pulled a guilty look and shuffled his feet while he scratched the back of his head. "Sorry, Adele," he muttered. "Will you shut it, kids?" said John. "I'm talking here." Adele extended her left arm out, and the jewels on her bracelet began to glow as her strange weapon magically returned to her, where it cleaved onto the bracelet all by itself. In the light, one could see the ornate patterns that were detailed into the weapon.
"Don't make me come back out here,"
said Adele.
"or you're gonna suffer for it."
Adele then walked back to her room, leaving the 2 boys to nurse their wound. John hung up on his phone and called out for Raziel, who leapt down from out of nowhere. "Raz, you're watching the house. I'm going down to the pub." "Bring me back some for my shoulder," said Dante. "Man, I'm gonna feel this in the morning." "I'm only going away on business," replied John. "I'm not going to be gone for long." John then snapped his fingers repeatedly while pointing at Vincent and then Dante consecutively. "You, don't eat Dante's chicken. You, Quit pissing off Fidel, I don't want to hear it. He then pointed at the dog hidden behind the couch. You stop eating bloody cats in the neighbourhood, I'm sick of paying out damage fees. Sabafang rolled his eyes and grunted again. He's not very talkative tonight, said Raziel. I believe one of his victims had caught his tongue. Sabafang stuck out his tongue to reveal that one of his victims had indeed scratched large gouges in his tongue.
It hurts too much to talk properly,
he replied with a Russian accent. I passed pharmacy on the way back home then, replied John. He left the room and moments later a motorbike could be heard charging down the road. John's ride was a unique vehicle, as the front half resembled a proper chopper motorbike, and for the back half was what appeared to be a large, silk-laced furnished trailer, like the inside of a modern-day coffin. However, the back was also covered by a stained blue tarpaulin. John finally came to a stop outside of a dank pub with the word Ulleroos inscribed on the front in graffiti. He entered and sat at the bar with his scythe hung over his shoulder. Yo, barkeep! He shouted. The barkeep was wearing a hemp robe with a large hood that hid his entire face, and he used a length of rope as a belt. The bartender pulled off his hood to reveal Brian, who had been scarred gruesomely in the past. The left side of his face appeared torn and charred down to the bone beyond all recognition, and a few slashes appeared on the right. In the light, his burns appeared to slowly brighten and then bleed, and so he put his hood back on. Long time no see, cousin, said John. You want a drink? Replied Brian. Nah, mate, I've got a proposition for you. Brian decided to pour himself a beer as he listened. Alright, mate, strange things are going on around here. Hideous figures have been sighted prowling around at night, and occult symbols have been appearing out of nowhere. Carved or splattered on some of Aussie's most sacred icons. I think there's a fan spinning somewhere. Shit's about to go down into it. I want to find out what, when, where. What do you say? Not interested, said Brian. Look, don't say this much, cousin, but I can't do this alone. Brian sighed bitterly. What's in it for me? John pulled a large knife out of his pocket and pointed at Brian's face. The knife had a set of military dog tags attached to it by a chain fixed through a hole drilled into the handle. I can help you find the guy who did this, you know. Prove it. Already taken care of, I arranged to deal with him and his gang here. You what? I just cleaned out the benches from the last fight. Look, there's a tooth stuck in the bench. You got any pliers? Nah, mate, but he should be here any minute. John was interrupted by the door being kicked down by a massive brutish thug. He was followed by several gangsters. The leader then walked up to John. Are you the punk who challenges us? He sneered. That's right. First off, let's get this party started right. John suddenly stabbed an oversized sacrificial dagger into the bar, causing the embedded tube to pop out from sheer force. While Brian attempted to put the tooth into his mouth, he observed the dagger. It was made of stone, and the blade was curved like a serpent. The handle had two curved spikes, like animal fangs, emerging from the end. One spike was twice the size as the smaller one. The hilt guard had two spikes protruded from either side in a fashion where one spike was pointing the same direction as the blade, while the other one was floating over the handle. While Brian observed the knife, John then threw his military knife into a nearby radio, which sprung into life with rock music. He then jumped over one of the gangsters with a backflip and stabbed him with a scythe as he landed. Brian grabbed a double-barreled shotgun in each hand and put the sacrificial dagger between his teeth. He jumped onto the bar and began screaming a war cry. Then, out of the nearby toilet stalls, emerged a tall, dark-skinned man who had a very large afro. His clothing was somewhat similar to Vincent's in appearance, as he wore a torn flannelette shirt, denim jeans, but instead of boots, he wore sandals. Luke, get your black ass over here, shouted John. Luke replied by kicking over one of the empty tables, and then out of his afro, he pulled a large handgun, and he began firing at the enemy gangsters. Between John's scythe, Brian's shotguns and dagger, and Luke's handgun, a bloodbath ensued that killed all but one of the enemy party. The survivor tried to hide behind the table, but John acquired a hooked chain from seemingly nowhere, and then dug the hook straight into the man's back, after which he hoisted him up from one of the roof beams. Brian walked up to the chained man and whispered, "Remember me," menacingly into his ear. The man frantically tried to plead for mercy, but Brian simply walked away. From out of his robe, he took a clay model of a person, as well as several large needles, and then he threw them at the nearby wall. John tried to rip the victim down, but instead the poor soul magically flew across the room and smacked into the wall, bleeding from wherever the doll was pinned. Brian slid the dagger out of his teeth and ripped down on the chain that was still attached to the corpse, ripping it in two. He then wiped the blood off of his face and turned to John. "I'm in," he said. "What the hell's going on up in here?" asked Luke. "Tell you," said John. "You meet me at my house tomorrow morning. I'm going to have to prepare beforehand." "For what?" "George's going to have to see." John retrieved his military knife from the radio and turned it off before he left the building. Okay, and that was the end of the first chapter. Now this is the part where I talk a little bit about the symbolism that has occurred in the chapter, and most of you would have noticed that some of the children that have been introduced have strangely coloured eyes, namely Raziel, Dante and Adele, who have red and purple eyes respectively, like gender-wise. Not to mention they have a talking dog, which is kind of weird. Now that's actually something I don't want to spoil at first, but another thing I should mention is the usage of the song "Use Your Fist and Not Your Mouth" by Marilyn Manson. Manson is a pretty good artist, and I will be using a lot of his music in later chapters. Other usages of music will include the main theme of the game Final Fantasy VII, as well as the song "Find Your Way," which appears in Final Fantasy VIII. So for you gamers, you may hear soundtracks from games you played, sometimes you may hear songs from games you haven't played, and I would actually recommend some of these games to you if you are into that sort of thing. I will tell you what games these are from in the symbolism section at the end of every chapter. On another subject, I should note John has a military knife with dog tags attached, and Brian has been scarred in the past, which is actually the future done from 2016, which is now. But anyway, we might see how these events have occurred, like was John in World Wars 3 and 4? How did Brian exactly come to be scarred? We may never know. We may find out sooner or later. Also, basically at the beginning and end of each chapter, I'll also do a previously on and next time on section where I will explain past and future details, just in case you do not remember what happened last time, and a little hint at what happens next time. And so next time on Hell's Crusade, marvel at the prison break that occurs when one of John's friends is abducted by the military, and see the weirdness that occurs as more supernatural forces appear. So yeah, this is NecroarcanistXIII in association with Bandit 1569 signing off, and